to take this opportunity to really thank all of you for having worked with us towards the development of the guideline, but more importantly, for having sought us out so that we could have an engagement, because this document, as far as we are concerned, will be key in its implementation. And therefore, your active involvement is very, very important. We have come here with a very, very open mind. We are saying that, look, we have prepared a draft, and let's listen to the stakeholders, areas that they are happy with, and areas that they would want some further clarification, and areas that they would want to review, so that in the final analysis, we should have a document that is owned by all of us as the stakeholders, as a way of really contributing towards supporting the sector. And this is why when Emily reached out, and Mercy reached out and said that, look, my colleagues wanted to meet your team so that we could be able to at least discuss about the draft guideline. We said this opportunity that we don't want to miss, and that is why we are here. We are here at your invitation, so we would request that therefore you take the lead in the discussion and presentation, and thereafter then we can be able to respond. And with that background, I would now like to pass the microphone back to you, Asek. Welcome. Now you can share the screen if need be.
Thank you very much, Professor and team, first of all, for agreeing to do this. We know it was on short notice, but here we are. We really want to thank you. And also thank all the stakeholders that have been able to attend today, to attend this call today. We also know it was on very short notice, but we can see that you managed to be here.
Please raise your voice because I'm in a noisy place.
Sorry, can you hear me properly now, Prof? Okay, so let me continue. Now I'll start with the small presentation or what ASEC is for context so that people can understand what we do. At ASEC, we are the Association of Startup and SMEs Enablers of Kenya. And we are a membership association that brings together and represents the interest of entrepreneur support organizations. That is the accelerators, incubators, makerspaces, even co-working spaces, all support organizations that really help to entrepreneurs scale their impact. And with that said, we are driven by 5 pillars, which are policy, internationalization, capacity building, empowerment, internationalization, capacity building, empowerment, and policy. So we really took our time to be able to help Kenya, or rather took our time to help Kenya create, that is Kenya National Innovation Agency, craft these guidelines that will see that the ecosystem is a better place to do business, both for ESOs and entrepreneurs themselves. And it is for enhancing the coordination of the innovation hubs in Kenya, which has been prepared under the framework. And it is with funding with the European Union that we have been able to do this, or rather Kenya has been able to do this. So what I'd like to do is I'll share the screen, start with the document, and I'll invite Dr. Tom's team to be able to take us through the document because they have a greater insight on this document. And just a moment as I share. And I also welcome the whole a lot of stakeholders to be able to participate. Let us be proactive in asking questions and also participating in giving feedback about how you would like things crafted, or rather your feedback is very, very important, and so is your input. So this is the document. Professor Karibu Sana, please take us through the document, the guidelines for the coordination and management of innovation hubs in Kenya. Hello, anyone from the Kenya National Innovation Agency?
Thank you very much. Maybe I should just speak a little bit. First of all, is that this document, thank you very much for the opportunity. That is, you're right. And in terms of the way you provided the background, so it is at the request of Kenya National Innovation Agency that this work started, and we have received a lot of support from ASEC, among others. So as you see, it is a policy support facility. And so we have not yet fully embraced it to be able to speak for it. So we are at a stage where the work is gradually being transitioned to Kenya for adoption and operationalization. So I'm not yet authoritative enough to speak to this document. So I think maybe because we didn't communicate as exactly who is going to present, so maybe Professor Ogada, do you want us to hand over to you or your team for purposes of the highlights?
All right. You know, I'd assumed that they must have gone through it and were having some specific issues that they wanted to raise. But if that is not the case, then I'll just invite Jeff to walk them through and give some brief highlights. And thereafter, then we can have a comprehensive discussion, if that's okay.
Yes,
Maybe did you have any specific questions, just for clarity's sake? Do you have any, or you would rather we kind of go through and then we can have a reaction?
Would like going through it, have an overview, and then we can get reactions from the stakeholders.
Okay.
Okay.
That's fine. That can be driven by Jeff. So Jeff, just go ahead, please.
Thank you, Tony and Tom. Yes, that's not a problem. I'm wondering if instead of going through the document, I have a PowerPoint presentation that might actually be more pleasing to the eye, and it summarizes the report. If you would let me share the screen.
Yeah, that will be excellent.
That will be a better option. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'm going to share the screen in the PowerPoint presentation, and I will briefly go through it. I think for each section, what I could do is, if there's questions, you can raise your hand and we'll try to answer them. But I also want to, as Tony has mentioned, this is still at a very draft stage. These are guidelines, they're not regulations. So I want people to feel free to provide input and any clarifications at any time, please. So I'm going to share. This works. Okay, so I will share and I will. No, I don't want that. I want that. No, I don't want that. No, that. There we go. So I will go right to the beginning. Okay, very good. I hope we can see that.
Yes, we can see it.
Very good. Okay, thank you very much. So I'll try to cover these 8 areas. And as you can see, I can't see any hand raising. So maybe just jump in, or we can save the questions to the very end. Maybe that's the best way. but I'll try to be as brief and concise as possible. So the main objective, as mentioned by my colleagues, was to develop a guideline that can assist the coordination and management. And as you know, being in ASEC, you know that there's many accelerators, incubators, research hubs, maker spaces that have evolved in the last 3-5 years. And I think there was a recognition that we have to have some understanding of this as the government of Kenya, because lots of funding has been going into this, a lot of promises, and at the same time, we need to have some outcomes. So it's accountability, just so we can have some understanding of what's going on. But also, I think there's a recognition that innovation hubs can be a very powerful mechanism to bring about economic development. So it's twofold. Can we get an understanding of what's taking place in Kenya? And at the same time, can we actually provide better support to this very powerful instrument for business development and innovation? So we undertook a number of activities over the course of the last 6 months. Some of you we've met in a fora. We've had interviews, we've done desk research. My other colleague, Ramika, is not here with us from South Africa. Many of you, she's involved in another part of the project, in looking at basic research, commercialization, but there's a lot of overlap as well. So as we know, I'll skip some of this. These are issues that emerge, startup challenges. A lot of this was undertaken by Professor Tom in previous work with the UNDP. We're looking at challenges with definitions, skills, registration, gender disparity, certification, funding, of course, access to information, linkages, and of course, as we know, the startup bill has yet to pass yet, which is very important in support for business startups, and also access to infrastructure, especially access to basic research and facilities, especially at universities and other research institutions in Kenya. Of course, on the other side, the innovation hubs have challenges as well. This is again, definitions. We're looking for standards. Not everyone should call themselves an innovation hub, maybe. There's also this ability to offer short-term courses. We need categorization of hubs. Can we actually measure? Measurement came up quite a bit about measuring the impact of innovation hubs. Can we actually recognize that we shouldn't put all our emphasis on hubs because they themselves have limitations? And do we want startups that are successful, or do we want a blanket training program? And there's a tension of what hubs can deliver, and maybe we have expectations that can't be fulfilled. And are we actually using the existing hub infrastructure, especially some of the more upcountry hubs may not be fully utilized? Also, again, the collaboration and partnerships is very critical. There's a thing, what we call open innovation, where there's a recognition that no one institution or organization has all the knowledge. And can we actually share and develop these linkages and partnerships? And again, registration. Can we register hubs? Just so that we know that someone that calls themselves a hub is. So these are the challenges that were picked up in our research, and also in the work that was done by Professor Tom and other works that has gone on in the last few years. And we give a lot of thanks that the sharing of previous research informed our own work. So I won't go into so much of the definitions. We came up with definitions that are very important. We didn't come up with this ourselves. This comes from the literature. What are accelerator hubs, business startups, corporate innovation hubs, digital innovation hubs, enterprise and co-working spaces, hacker spaces, horizontal hubs. We also have incubator hubs, innovation hubs, maker spaces, R&D innovation labs, sector industry hubs, and technology hubs. And of course, these are not set in stone. We must really recognize that there are hybrids of all of these different categories. And these are just some of the examples that have been raised that are, some are in Kenya, some are elsewhere, that we picked up in Africa and in Southeast Asia. We did a comparative benchmark of some of the growing literature of innovation hubs. And what we wanted to recognize is that we don't want to just say there's one type of hub. The goal of the hubs, of course, is to develop businesses through innovation and support. And there are different ways, and there's a continuing good practice emerging. So there isn't just one type of hub. Hubs are changing, and they continually change in what they're offering and their formation. So we want to recognize this is not a regulation saying that you have to be defined by this. These are just examples of what the ecospace is out there, what type of hubs are involved in innovation. Now, in our previous discussion, we had this idea of what or who does the innovation hub serve? And for the most part, we're recognizing that they support the development of small business, and we call them startups. But startups themselves are not a universally agreed to term. They can be freelance individuals, they can be independent small businesses. They can also be small business units out of a large corporate entity. A lot of corporate innovation hubs have been using the hub structure to come up with new ideas and new technologies. What we do recognize, though, are startups put a lot of energy into innovation, whether it's new products, new services, process innovation, new business models. That tends to be what differentiates startups from other small businesses. They also tend to focus on short, medium, and long-term objectives. And they have a potential for high levels of growth, whether growth is economic or revenue generated, or maybe becoming from small businesses to medium and large businesses. But there is a distinct difference from other types of small businesses. And what we're saying is that a lot of Innovation Hub activity focuses on this startup perspective. So we tried to come up with some indicators for innovation hubs. Now, this became tricky because innovation hubs have their own agendas. You have your own directors and managers that you have to answer to, and you have your own way of measuring success. That is fantastic. What Kenya and what we were concerned with was that what do we think innovation hubs are all about? And what we thought that would be useful for ASEC and maybe Kenya is how do the innovation hubs contribute to new business startups? So what we're looking for are two sets of indicators. One set is looking at the inputs that innovation hubs have to measure that can lead to the outcomes. So what we're thinking of, what activities are useful to develop new businesses? So we're looking at training activities. We're looking at the different types of training activities. Perhaps the focus of the hubs, whether they're focusing on a technology or an industry, whether they're generating revenue. Now, some of you may ask, well, isn't revenue an output? Yes, but sometimes, well, remember, we're looking at what contributes to small business development. And it's the revenue that can support business development. So we're looking at income activities. We're looking at income revenue generated from grants and subsidies that contribute to small business development. We're also concerned and very interested in whether hubs can generate new forms of capital, whether this is venture capital or investment generated that can be contributing to small business development. So what we're looking at is, can we count the number of clients that received investments and maybe the total investment? Not the investment that the hubs received, but do the activities that are undertaken by hubs, whether they lead to businesses, to startups receiving venture capital. The outcome indicators, again, this is where we get some interesting discussion, because one output in innovation is a patent or a copyright registration. Now, for a lot of firms, this is an input. But we're trying to measure, at least, or recommending for at least from ASEC and government, is that we want to show that hubs contribute to innovation activities. So a patent is considered to be an output in innovation. Doesn't necessarily lead to successful business, doesn't necessarily lead to successful innovation, but it's an indicator to show that we are engaged in innovation. So we're interested to know how many patents are being registered. Really, what we want to know is that how many successful businesses have.
Jeff, are we still together?
Jeff, we cannot hear you any longer. Something went wrong.
I think he's having a connection problem, but meanwhile, as he fixes his network, I can see people have already started bringing inputs in the chat room. And one Wilfred is saying that some hubs run incubation programs as well as accelerator programs. Maybe we shouldn't be too stringent on definition and standardization. I view hubs as a private sector sector players, so they should be allowed room to innovate on their unique propositions, which require pivoting between different categories in the spectrum. So, Alessandro, what do you have to say about that? Maybe you could give your insights on that.
Thank you for the question, but what I prefer that the experts replies directly. So let's give some moment to Jeff to reconnect. And also George Kosimbe is about also to joining us, but what we could do maybe meanwhile is to start getting other questions so you can, I see that Jeff is reconnected. Jeff, can you hear us?
Yeah, I apologize. I don't know what happened. I got cut off completely. Apologies. I'll try to share a screen again, shall I?
Yes, please. There were already some questions, but maybe you can finishing and then we have we get the questions. What I was telling is also that our other expert George Kosimbe is about to join. But please, meanwhile, please go ahead. Thanks, Jeff.
Okay, I do apologize. I'm not sure what happened there. Right, so sorry, and also my PowerPoint went off. Let me get this up again. Okay. Geez. Okay. All right, let's try this again. I do apologize. Where are we? So I'm not sure where we got cut off. but I think I'll move away from the indicators but I want to just talk about where we are in terms of where we think, and you could be an interesting discussion where you think the innovation hubs engage with small businesses. But what we found is that there are 5 types of business development that more or less businesses can follow. Now, there's a 6th one that I didn't mention, and that tends to be when businesses fail. But we're trying to be an optimist here and be very positive. So what we're looking at is the 5 stages of small business development. And so we have early development stage, we have a seed capital stage, early commercialization, growth strategy, and expansion stage. And what we propose, and it's looking at some of the activities of innovation hubs, is that for the most part, innovation hubs tend to focus on the first 3 stages of business development: the early stage, the seed stage, and early commercialization stage. For the most part, once we move into the growth stage, we start moving into business getting bigger. They need new facilities. There still might be some relationship, but for the most part, the business services that innovation hubs offer are no longer needed. And of course, the expansion stage is when the businesses are very successful and everyone makes lots of money and they say goodbye to the innovation hub. So for the most part, we're seeing the priority activities are at the first 3 early stages. Now, we're also looking at the different types of services offered. And again, as we've said, there are no firm set of rules who offers what type of services. But for the most part, we're looking at office and infrastructure and technology services. We're looking at innovation training and support. Remember, we're focusing on innovative firms. So we should be offering them support in how to develop new products and services, how to introduce new process innovation. That should be our primary focus. How do you manage innovation projects? A lot of project management skills is very, very critical, including how to say no to our innovation because it's not working. All right, that's the hardest thing. As a matter of fact, I think that's probably the most critical thing is when do we say that our activities will not succeed? Business skills, really critical. A lot of innovation hubs, what we call either at maybe the co-working spaces or the makerspace type of hub, probably don't often offer a lot of business skills training, whether it's business modeling, business plans, management skills, how to manage people, how to communicate, marketing skills, not just selling, but how do you plan and actually reach out to new areas, whether it's a new market, export, or expanding a local market, or branding, positioning your product. Very, very important. And what is really important, I've done a previous project at the TIVET level, where we're looking at transversal competences, behavior activities, how to work with a team, how to communicate, how to problem identify and problem solve. Very critical skills that are not just tied to one technology or one sector, but can be used throughout a different environment, a different space. So these are the type of services and skills and training that a lot of hubs offer. Not all hubs offer all of this, and we're not saying that. What we're saying that these tend to be the standard services offered by different types of innovation hubs. Additional services or different ways of thinking is that we can offer our services different ways, our training. We can do it through formal training. We can do it through mentoring. We can do it through coaching. Critically, a very good practice is emerging where we have peer-to-peer or cohort learning. And more, especially after what we've experienced from the pandemic, e-learning is very critical. And of course, we can have a hybrid of any of these combinations. Also important, and it's something that might be something that we need to emphasize in the Kenyan experience, is the collaboration with the private sector. We need to form these partnerships early on. Can we develop links with the corporate business sector? Access to experienced business personnel for training and mentoring is really, really critical. I've been involved in programs in different countries where large corporations take on training small businesses, offering mentoring and training sessions. And also the startups can actually develop links with businesses. This could be even through a transaction, become suppliers to large businesses. And a lot of times, sometimes the startups might actually be taken over by the large business, or they become employees, right? These are just different modes, different opportunities of linkages with big business. Also, another service that is not offered by every innovation hub, but is critical, are seed capital services and venture capital services. Seed capital, of course, is the early stage financing, not necessarily just supporting operational, but providing a bit of money so they can do some prototyping, work on their designs. Moving into the venture capital, of course, is when you take equity position and you're actually looking at moving into large scale or expansion growth. Different types of funding. And of course, all hubs and all small businesses are crying out for funding support. And many hubs don't offer this, and we recognize that. So how do we support collaboration? Well, one offer that we're proposing maybe is that we have Kenya can actually have a seal of approval, which could support tenders and funding requests for new hubs. You know, through ASEC in Kenya, you could have a brand of an innovation hub, the Kenyan brand of innovation. Increasingly, in international bids, we're looking at having partnership bids, where if you're going to have a partner or you want to bid for, say, a continuation or a new hub, then you could actually say, well, yes, you can have a hub financing, but perhaps you need to have a link with a university or a corporate link. And we do this in research in the UK all the time, where you have to show that you have different partners, industry partners, different universities, and that becomes part of the tendering bid. So it's a way that we can actually introduce incentives, but it also allows us to develop collaboration. More and more, we also see the role of innovation hubs supporting wider social inclusion, social and economic inclusion. Now, there's a tension here, because a lot of times if you have an innovation hub that wants to only perhaps work on business startups, how do we actually then bring in some of these other very important social and economic priorities? Well, this is where government could actually say we fund perhaps the innovation hub to offer training or to run a separate program. But there are ways we can do that, and we should recognize that the expertise of innovation hubs can actually could have a wider reach than just the narrow remit of small business. But it's very important that we actually call it a separate program and not confuse the issue. We can't do everything at once, and resources are very limited. We should also recognize that hubs have an expertise that actually could provide services to other businesses, to other hubs, to the higher education sector. In a way, what we shouldn't say that an individual innovation hub should have all the expertise. Some hubs could offer, say, 3D printing, small scale manufacturing support. Other hubs are really good at marketing. Why not share that and actually offer, they could assist each other, and through a transaction, business transaction. So we shouldn't work in isolation. We should actually form maybe hub expertise. that actually then becomes an area of competence that can actually be a service delivery or a service product in amongst itself. So what we're looking at are what we wanted to move in, and we were asked what happens with new innovation hubs. So just to take a step back, the existing hub structure, the good work that ASEC has done in the past, I don't think anyone wants to take that away. Anyone wants to regulate that, and no one wants to say that the job has not been done well. But there's so many new hubs emerging that the government, I think, wants to have a recognition of how do we actually manage this process. So there might be a need to register hubs. And the areas that we want to look at are the ownership structure, the management structure. What is the business model? Are the hubs specializing in areas? And how do hubs want to select or register startups? Not all hubs do the same thing. And it's important that I think, at least for the government wants to know, are hubs just focusing on winners, or are they offering a wider perspective, more training, more focus on other issues rather than just focusing on that one winner? And what is the monitoring and evaluation and learning program? One of the issues that emerged is that, do hubs share good practice? Right. It's important that we all share what the good things as well as things that don't work well. No sense all of us making the same mistake. So it's having this type of forum where you come together and talk about what worked and what didn't work in any of our activities. So how do we actually have an incentive? Why should I join? Why should we actually develop this type of registration? Again, as we said earlier, you could have a government recognition of a Kenyan Innovation Hub system, which is really important if you actually want to go for external funding. If it's recognized by the government of Kenya and it is supported, then that actually should be a seal of approval to attract external donors. You could be included in national and international bids for future development. But also you're developing an expertise at the hub level on how business development works, right? Think about it, you're doing the hard work. In many ways, we should be learning from you. You know what works and doesn't work. And there should be an opportunity for that expertise to be at the national level, right? You shouldn't be calling upon people that have never worked with businesses to come up with this platform, you know? And so your advisory role will become very critical by being part of this, the Kenyan innovation system. So what we've done so far is we've looked at definitions, we've looked at indicators, we've tried to come up with some way of registering new hubs if there's an interest. But we were also asked to look at, if not ASEC itself, but other association and networks. How do we actually support your association? So this is a tricky one because it is your association and no one wants to take away what you've done because you've done it from the grassroots. But what we've come up with is that there tends to be 4 types of associations, private sector associations dealing with business. And we can have, one is just a member benefit association where your whole objective is to achieve value for your members. So your ASEC, your job is strictly to make sure that there's value for your individual hubs. You can organize conferences, you provide, you're like a chamber of commerce or a trade association. You're there to represent your members and your interest is only at the member level. Moving along, we also have something called the Designation Granting Association, where this becomes a bit more important, where members are want to be part of your association because there's a lot of esteem. It's a lot of benefits to being part of your group. And you give memberships, you give certification. Not everyone can be a member. Maybe there's fees, but maybe you offer exams or you have a minimum criteria to say, well, not everyone can be a member. Do you come in, fit this type of criteria? Because there's a recognition amongst your peers that being a member has a high value. There's other associations where you can offer certifications. This is where perhaps when you think about professional engineers, not only do you go and become a university, you go through university, but you also have to write professional examinations to become a professional engineer. And so where you set the standards, in many ways, you are setting a standard of what an innovation hub is, right? In many ways, government would actually come to you and say, does this new hub fit the criteria? And ASEC would be maybe a certification body where you would actually assess the new hub and say that that fits the mandate of ASEC and should be recognized as an innovation hub. The last one is quite an interesting one, the professional regulatory body. This is where government decides that the expertise of the association is so great that it's almost outsourcing or handing over the certification role to the association. Think of ISO standards. This is not a government body. This is a private sector body or a not-for-profit. And many private sector companies use these quality or environmental standards. And government refers to them as their own standards, but they are enforced and developed by the businesses and the association. So in many ways, out of the four, we're not recommending what ASEC wants to do. It's up to you. It's your association, you as your body. But these are the type of possible roles and activities you could engage with if how you want to look upon yourself as an association. We also looked at the different types of measures you could look at. There's lots to do with member satisfaction. Does your membership grow? Do you retain your members? There's also, if you look at moving into designating a granting association, is how is it perceived, your designation? Do startups and hubs consider the ASEC brand or being part of that really important? And also, if you move to the professional regulatory bodies, does the general public now perceive ASEC as contributing to the innovation landscape? All right, so it's not just your members, but all of a sudden there's a lot of trust and confidence being developed by ASEC, and it's the general public will view your role and the contributions you make to society that way. So again, performance measures, tricky, but there are ways we can develop and support the association in whatever mode you want to follow. Right, so I'm moving along. I've gone very quickly, and I just want to reemphasize that the document gives a lot more detail than what I'm giving. I'm not doing the work of my colleagues' service. We put a lot of time and effort in the definitions, in the activities, and a lot of justification of why we're proposing these things. But we have a number of further recommendations that can be supported to ASEC by Kenya. But before I go on, I'm wondering whether we might want to field some questions before I go into the recommendations. Ali, is there anything I should look at?
Yeah, I think that there are a few comments, and also colleagues from ASEC were about to share them. I have to apologize. I need to leave for another meeting, but also George is joining you, Jeff, and I think that he's already there with us. So I will be rejoining you in a few minutes. I leave the floor to colleagues from ASEC to take care, because I think that there are a few questions also in the chat already. Okay. Okay.
So I'm more than willing to stop here. If you think we should have some comments or dialogue before we move into some further recommendations.
Yeah, I think it will be interesting to have field some recommendations and questions as well, and then we can move on. Maybe I've seen some few comments on the chat that maybe can allow me to field right now, and then you can give some insights. Is that okay?
Yeah, by all means, please.
Okay, so we have this is one that I had read. Let me read this one, and then I see somebody has lifted a hand. So some hubs run both incubation programs as well as accelerator programs. Maybe we shouldn't be too stringent on definition and standardization. I view hubs as private sector players, so they should be allowed room to innovate on their unique proposition, which requires pivoting between different categories in the spectrum. So what do you have to say about this comment?
I think it's a very good comment. I think it's a recognition of what is actually happening in the field, that these definitions have to always be revisited and are not science. These are definitions that are work in progress. So I think we had to start from somewhere, and we learned from experience, not just in Kenya, but elsewhere. But by all means, these definitions are just guides. They're not legal definitions by any means. But yes, it's a very good point.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I can see we have one hand. So Nekesa has raised her hand. Nekesa, please unmute yourself and proceed.
Thanks. I'm Nekesa Were, based in Nairobi. I work with AFPI Labs, which is a Pan-African network of innovation hubs. I have a few comments, and I think some of them may segue into the recommendations. I hope so. One, I felt the use of the word accountability at the very beginning was a bit problematic. For me, that insinuated some kind of very deliberate government involvement currently with innovation hubs, specifically funding, which would then result in some form of accountability required from the hubs, which I don't think is necessarily the case. And so I wonder if you can reframe that to something else other than the hubs being accountable to the government, just for the time being, while we figure out this relationship. Second, with regard to definitions, and to draw attention to some work that Ian from Growth Africa did. I think a lot of people on this call are familiar with him. If you go onto his LinkedIn, you'd see that. I supported him with it a little bit. It was basically attempting to define in our context what co-working spaces are, innovation hubs, accelerators, incubators, etc. And I think it might plug into this paper really well. On the role of hubs, I wonder if you considered what role hubs play outside of directly supporting startups. I'm thinking about the kind of connections that happen at hubs. If you think about the courses or the programs that they have for high school students or primary school students that just get them into the innovation space and into the tech space, have we considered that as we define the role of hubs, and then consequently how to measure that? What was the other one? I liked what you said around what could potentially be the role of hubs and of networks. For me, that's an ideal wish list. I think we're not there, not because we haven't thought about it, but because we just currently are not set up to even begin to engage at that level as we currently work with supporting startups, supporting innovators, and keeping the lights on as well. With regards to, there's a statement around revenue and service delivery. The way that I've experienced this with Kenyan hubs and with other hubs as well is in what we're now calling the hybrid hubs, which is the hubs that offer 3-4 things. And so you have your co-working, you have your programs for startups and innovators, and then you have some kind of service delivery that they have. And so for some, it's the research, for some, it's product development, for some, it's innovation consulting, and so on and so forth. And so that would be interesting to expand on, especially if you're looking at specific definitions. And then with regards to where I think the hubs could actually use support now, I'll go back to my very first point, it's the funding. If government is wanting to engage, I think the very first point of contact should be the great work that hubs are doing currently, and then how they would potentially plug into that, primarily with financial resources. I think hubs could definitely use some support in figuring out the individual measuring metrics, their M&E and the learning as well. Also the business modeling. So if it is that in order to be sustainable, hubs are increasingly moving to a hybrid model, then they need to figure out what model means, what that model is for them. And so support that business modeling. And then, no, actually that's it. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's you raised some very good points, and I appreciate the especially the first point about accountability. I don't like that word either. I think we have to rethink an appropriate term that can be supported by ASEC members and individual hubs that are not even part of ASEC, as well as Kenya. So it's a very good consideration, and I'll stop using that word anyways, but I'll make sure the document can be considered that as well. Regarding the Innovation Hub definitions, I will follow you up on that individual link. We try to look at many different documents on these definitions, and we tried to be as liberal as we could. But as we always miss something, and I will contact you directly for that. I appreciate that point. Yeah, the issue about other activities, we will look at that in the other recommendations. It's something really important, and I want to make sure that we have that recognized, that individual hubs offer many things. We focused on startups primarily, but we do recognize the role of other activities, especially the important priorities the government of Kenya has placed on social and economic inclusion and these priorities, but also development of other types of technology. We have, the 2030 vision, the focus on some of the blue water activities that can be more than just looking at business startups, but it's very, very important. And the point about funding, again, I'll focus on that when I move to the recommendations. It's something, of course, one always wants to talk about. But no, your points I appreciate very much. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Nekesa and Jeff. I can see we have Wilfred. Wilfred, please proceed. Unmute yourself and proceed.
Thank you. I think what I'm going to raise has been raised before in terms of let this just remain guidelines as opposed to legal or regulation. So we make this voluntary, right? And whatever that comes out of this document becomes suggestions as opposed to legal, something that have regulatory implication, because we don't want a situation where we'll now get to have crackdowns on hubs, right? When 10 years from now, we don't know who will be at the helm of ASEC or Kenya the year 2032, for example. So if we should avoid, or we should trend cautiously on regulation and make it, I don't know how KEPSA, for example, which guidelines led to formation of something like Kenya Private Sector Alliance, but you've seen it operates with its own freedom without government trying to overreach or control what the members are doing. So I think we should keep that in mind. I think the same issue was raised when the startup bill was being enacted, and it was being reviewed, and people were saying, let's tread cautiously on over-regulation so that we don't have a situation where someone will come around and say, okay, you're not doing 1, 2, 3 things, therefore I'm going to deregister you. So that's something we should always keep in mind.
I agree 100% on that, especially for the startups. It's very difficult when they're not, a lot of startups are not even dealing commercially. They're still at the pre-stage. And how do we have a formal registration when one of the the obstacles of many businesses was too much regulation, too many forms to fill out. So it's tricky to register startups, but we can register them in through the hubs. I think there's ways we can do that. So the government, I think, just wants to know, especially if government money is going in, there needs to be some understanding that something positive is coming out of the funding that goes into innovation and business development activities. Otherwise, it becomes the black hole that a lot of people think a lot of government funding goes into, and we know that's not the case. So, but your point about over-regulation is very much, and I think in the document itself, we say that this is not a regulatory document. This is suggested recommendations, suggested guidelines. But we will emphasize that even more so now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll read one more comments, and in the interest of time, we can go to the recommendations. And one, Dennis Okore is saying that the definition of startups in relation to other entities, such as MSMEs, SMEs, and also small growing businesses, requires a definitive differentiation that is acceptable across the board. And I think that is what Kenya is suggesting at this moment. And I don't know, what do you have to say? I think it's an open conversation, and also looking at the guidelines that Kenya is proposing, we can always have a back and forth and see what works for us and what doesn't. And in the event that most of the things do not work for us, we can go back to the drawing board and draw everything up. So I'll hand it back over to you, Jeff, and you can go into the recommendations if we do not have any other question.
Right, I'll go through the recommendations, and then maybe that will maybe answer some of the questions, but it may actually lead to some other ones. And again, I want to just point out that these are recommendations and we're still at the draft stage. So Kenya, it has still not agreed to all of this, and some of this still is open to conversations with ASEC and other players in the innovation field. So you know, this is we're sharing at early stage. So please feel free to offer any points. Okay, let's see if I. All right, so the recommendations. Hopefully you can see that. Yeah. Okay, so these recommendations are a bit all over the place. They're there to support ASEC. They're there to support innovation individual hubs, but they're also there to nurture sort of the innovation system itself. Don't forget, Kenya has a very large remit. It is responsible for the innovation system, the ecosystem of Kenya. And there's many players, many factors they have to consider. The innovation hub element is very important, but it's only one part of the platform. So it's to fit into the larger remit of what Kenya has to deliver. So the first recommendation, yes, of course, is funding, right? So what we're looking at is there's a recognition that funding is critical for new hubs, right? We're getting mixed messages. In one recent bit of research that Professor Tom did, we're looking at maybe about 20 to 30% of innovation hubs in Kenya are private, but the definition of private can be loosely open. So we're looking at business partnerships, we're looking at not-for-profit, NGOs, external. So we're looking at, but for the most part in Kenya, a lot of innovation hubs are not private. Let's put it that way. Whereas you look at other countries, a lot of innovation hubs, however we define them, are private. So we have to recognize the role of funding, whether it comes from external sources, whether it comes from the government directly. And it's very important that when this funding comes in, it meets requirements, but also there's a lot of flexibility. We don't want to put too many restrictions on the activities of hubs. So in the guidelines, we make some recommendations of how the funding can support new hubs, but also allow for flexibility in what hubs deliver. You're the experts, remember? You know, the managers and CEOs of hubs know what they're offering. In our last discussion, number 2, there was a big talk, something raised a point called pre-seed capital. Now, I'm not sure I understand what pre-seed capital is, but there is a recognition that seed capital is needed at many different types of hubs, right? How do you actually support startups when they're still at the concept stage, when they're still trying to do prototypes, when they haven't done their market research? So we kicked around some ideas, and one recommendation is that there can be a seed capital fund. This would be separate from the funding of the innovation hubs, but it would meet a bit more of a stringent requirements where the innovation hub would have to demonstrate some stability, maybe be in operation for a number of years, maybe undertake and support the indicators, the input and output indicators that we recommend, and is registered through the ASEC in Kenya system. So, and it would be an application for a system. So whether it's a grant or a loan, that's to be decided, whether it goes through Kenya or through a third party, that is to be decided. But we do recognize that seed capital is an important area for all the hubs. And maybe there's something that can be worked out to give that type of support. We do want to support the registration of hubs. Now, whether it goes through an ASEC or a Kenya system, but there has to be some recognition that not everyone should be called a hub, right? We have to have some integrity in the system. So we do strongly recommend that there is some form of registration so that there can be, someone knows what and how many hubs are, and the types of hubs that are being active in Kenya. Don't forget, someone has to be responsible, not just at the hub level, but you're bringing in new business startups. A lot of them are young people, and there has to be a duty of care. So at some point, there is a responsibility, and through registration, there can be some monitoring of what goes on. We do hope, and maybe it's through ASEC, not Kenya, that there is a performance of innovation hubs. So using the indicators that we recommend, and I think this is something we should think about, the positive of having performance surveys. Because you could actually benchmark, this could be a very good activity for ASEC itself to undertake. A lot of trade associations and industry associations provide services to their members. And you could actually tailor the performance measures. You could actually benchmark so other innovation hubs can see where they are compared to friendly competitors, should I say. And also, performance is really important when you actually start looking at the practices. So maybe through innovation forums or the innovation in National Innovation Weeks, you could discuss not only the numbers, but you can share behind closed doors some of the good emerging practices that deliver the performance measures. It is very important, and it's something that I think the government has to recognize, that the innovation hubs are only one part of business development process. Innovation hubs are very unique. They offer a very special place and space for innovation, but they can't solve all the issues. So what we're also recommending and recognizing is that other business support programs need to be continued. Other types of training, other support for other types of, not everyone is an entrepreneur, but it's business training is still needed for small businesses, right? Not all of them are not all businesses are going to come up with new products and services, but they're still a small business and very important to the economy. And they probably still need some support. So what we're suggesting is, let's not think that the innovation hubs and the services they are critical, but they can't solve all the challenges. Critically, hubs can actually be a linchpin, a mechanism to support other social and economic priorities I mentioned earlier, but this has to be tied in and separate from the day-to-day innovation hub activities. Innovation hubs are experts at developing and supporting new businesses. If you're going to now ask them to maybe bring in and support people with disabilities, give training to disadvantaged youth, yes, they can do that, but maybe they need other funding facilities and other types of support. So hubs offer lots of things, but you need to make sure that they are also financially supported in those other activities. Registration of new businesses, I think this should be done through the hubs rather than through an official means. I mean, you can register your startups if they go through a program, but are they yet new businesses? I know there's a real discussion in Kenya about the informal sector versus the formal sector, but startups themselves aren't all businesses yet. But you can actually call them new startups if they're actually maybe engaging in some of the hub programs, some of the training, and just keep track of them that way, rather than actually a formal government program. One role that hubs can play is the demonstration of new technologies. I was thinking more like some of the digital platforms. The expertise that are being developed in the hubs is really important and should be recognized, but they can also be used to show other parts of the economy, perhaps how they can use new technologies. Hubs can be put on demonstrations. You can show off your new technologies, your new businesses to the wider public. And it's a way of marketing yourselves. What we didn't go in some of the definitions, I noticed one of the comments was about the university hubs, and we do talk about research labs and innovation hubs, research innovation labs at the university level. And there's a section on that and the importance that can play in supporting, especially basic and applied research emerging out of higher education. But other specialized hubs that focus on, say, education or healthcare, or even other technologies, can support government priorities. Right? Government can see hubs as being a really useful way of supporting some of their long-term visions. I think it's very important, as I mentioned earlier, about the sharing of good practice. So can we link the performance measures with cohort, with good practice? And I mentioned one good practice of cohort and peer learning, and it was developed in the accelerator hubs primarily, but I've also noticed them now being used in co-working spaces. I've seen them used in incubators and at research labs. So just as someone mentioned earlier about the hybrid hubs, and we shouldn't be so strict on our definitions. Yes, because it used to be, we would say cohort learning, that meant accelerators. But we now know that that's a good practice that's emerging in so many other types of hubs. And we have to share those good practices amongst all the different types of hubs in the country. Critically, we should not be funding business startups directly. The role of government, we know funding is important, but government should not be playing the role of venture capitalists. It's a very risky activity. Even setting up a third-party fund is very, very tricky. I think the role of government should be there as a network facilitator, introducing to private investors taking advantage of local and international venture capitalists, and using government's very good network in introductions and supporting maybe trade missions or investment missions. But funding directly small businesses is very, very risky. Businesses fail. And assessing what is a good business and what is a successful business is a very, very, it's difficult. And I would strongly advise governments not to get directly involved in that type of activity. So as I said, they can get involved in networking. And this is really important, especially we're looking at in Kenya, why can't we start looking at Kenyan investors? I know we always want to look at international investors, but how do we educate and bring about a very strong middle-class Kenyan investor to invest in small businesses, right? It's a change of behavior, a change of attitude, but it can be done. And I think it's really important that we start looking at local solutions. Also critical, if you are a type of hub, particularly the accelerator type hubs where investment is critical for your successful clients, startups, we have to get the investors part of your program early on. Investors are looking for certain things. And we have to make sure that our activities and our programs are aligned to what investors are. Not all hubs want to do that. Not all hubs want to get involved in venture capital, but there are hubs that do want to do that. And in many ways, we have to treat the investor as steering and get them involved in the programs at the early stages. And as I mentioned earlier, let's get local investors involved in our programs, right? We shouldn't always be looking at the external donor or external investors. So that's the recommendations. I think we'll have some questions, obviously, but I think, as I said, I just want to conclude by saying that these are just recommendations. It doesn't mean that Kenya or ASEC, we don't expect everything to be taken up. We expect to be challenged. It's up to you to adapt it the way you want. And I look forward to any comments, please.
Thank you very much, Jeff. And that was a good presentation. We can now take questions. And as we take questions, I see we have some new comments on the chat box, and people are interested. And one of the comments is that there is a need to enhance knowledge and an awareness within government on this idea of hubs and accelerators. The other one is, which I found very, very interesting, that very few hubs have gotten any government funding and support to date. Will be good to benchmark how other ecosystems are managing and or coordinating their hub, such as Startup India, Israel, and Estonia. So Jeff, now in terms of benchmarking, with regard to developing these recommendations and everything, what do you have to say when it comes to comparing the Kenyan, how we are driving the Kenyan ecosystem with regard to the hubs and other ecosystems?
Yeah, so that would have been a very interesting program if we could adapt and spent a lot of time looking at other international hubs and government supports. We looked at a few, but I will admit that we looked mostly at secondary information. Of course, the successful ones, everyone voices India and Nigeria, but India, of course, is such a big country. And they have some government, but they also have a lot of private hubs, what I would call corporate hubs. And that in Nigeria, of course, it's very, how do I say this politely? We always hear the successful stories, and as a researcher, I'm always interested to know what is the real story. And it's very difficult unless you're on the ground to get that real story. So everything we read in the articles and secondary is, look how wonderful everything is. And I always question that because I think a lot of challenges and mistakes and failure have also taken place. And I think that's where the really interesting lessons are. And those are difficult. We didn't really pick up on those issues, I have to admit. So we tried to pull out the good things. And it's what was presented is a hybrid of some of the good practices that have come out of other countries. Benchmarking, though, and it's very interesting, you said that Kenya, you don't think government has given money to the hubs. I'd be very interested to know how we define government money directly or supported by other mechanisms. But yeah, the point's well taken. It's very good to know what other international benchmarking is, what other countries are doing. Just one small point about that. There is the global incubator innovation hub index, and I spent a lot of time looking at that. And we have to be very careful about benchmarking against things we're not doing. The international benchmarking is very biased, I think, towards machine learning, very much based what's going on in China and the United States. And that's the trend in what they call it artificial intelligence, but it's really machine learning technologies. And that puts Kenya, although you have some very, very good examples of what goes on in those fields, you're doing so much other things, but those other activities are not represented in some of these benchmarking exercises. So be very careful about benchmarking because you want to compare like for like. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We are still taking questions, and it will be good to also participate in questioning this document so that we can also make it a better document, or rather we can make these recommendations. We can refine them as much as we can at this early stage. I believe there's something you mentioned earlier with regard to a lot of Kenyan hubs not being private, but I can see here in the case I saying that even though she has no data to support, she assumes that most Kenyan hubs are private.
Yeah, I'm open to discussion. We were using some other surveys and data on the hubs, so it was not our work. And I guess the definition of private and public is we need to be educated on that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I can see the last comment here from Ida, and it says Ida Ngang, and it says that we are also wondering, hubs don't get funding from the government in Kenya because they have their own funding mechanism. Which ones are being referred to, and it will be good to know.
Yeah, I agree. I think we, whether that information can be shared amongst ASEC or whether it has to be private, I don't know, but it's a very good point.
So Ida, maybe you could elaborate a little bit further on this question. Would you like to speak?
Yeah, I think it's pretty straightforward because we are wondering which hubs are being referred to when we're talking about the kind of, for example, the recommendations are talking about streamlining the services, getting feedback from the hubs in terms of the kind of impact that has been achieved or attained. But when we look at hubs not getting funding from government of Kenya, most of them, that is what we know. So we are wondering which ones are being referred to in this particular point, or which ones are these that are funded by the government, or are we referring to a different kind of setup? I don't know.
So if we're referring to the recommendations, the two recommendations were funding. The first one is general funding that if governments want to support hubs to do certain activities, this is just the startup for hubs. But if you're talking about the seed capital funding, this is something new. It's just being proposed, and it came out of our discussions earlier on, that there seems to be a need for that. This is still early stages, nothing has been finalized, but so no one has received any funding yet, I am aware of, unless the, but there could be some, there must be some government funding, or how shall I put it, directed funding from other third bodies. If not through Kenya, then through other ministries, and it's supporting, I'm thinking like research labs, right? The innovation labs at the university level. You know, your universities have some research labs. I know my colleague George is involved in them. They've been funded, maybe not necessarily by the government of Kenya, but by other bodies. So I guess I'm a bit uncertain whether you're referring to existing funding from the government of Kenya or this new funding that we're proposing.
We are referring to existing funding.
Yeah, that I'm not aware of too much, although George, I don't know if you can answer that question directly, given your experience.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. Ida, I hear you. Are we talking about the recommendation or somewhere in the guidelines?
Okay, the recommendation is for the C fund, or if that's what you're calling it, I get that, and it has been explained very well.
Yeah,
I'm referring to existing funding, which hubs are getting government hubs. I'm not aware of this personally, and my colleagues who I'm with right now are not aware of this. It would be good to know. Probably there's a fund that has been going on and we have no idea.
the funding that is being referred to is not direct funding from government, but the fact that some the operations, for example, they're paid for through taxes. Yeah, because it's an incubator, say, in the public sector. So the staffing, overheads, you know, they are being met by money from the exchequer, yeah, to be able to facilitate the operations.
So in this case, we'll be referring to hubs which are, for example, in universities?
Yeah, some of the hubs in universities or research institutes, you know, where the overheads are met by, you know, resources from the exchequer, yeah, which are budgeted for the institution, where the hubs are,
so that would be
domiciled.
Public, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So it has nothing to do with the other hubs that exist, the other innovation hubs that exist that are mostly private?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I can see Nekesa has her hand up. Nekesa, please proceed.
Yeah, I think three things. One, thanks for that clarity, because it was quite concerning that this paper might have been coming from a position where hubs that we currently define as private majority, well, not majority, some of whom are represented here, it seemed to allude to the fact that they might be getting direct or indirect government funding. I was willing to pursue that if what we're talking about was, say, funding that comes through the World Bank or through GIZ that funds some of the programs that private hubs run, then that might have been something to consider. But I think majority hubs, when they look at interaction with funders or public sector specifically, and the kind of funding that they might be looking at, is the kind that isn't attached. And so operational funding primarily, which that for sure, I think we can say with 100% certainty that does not go to private hubs. So that's one. Two, I have to make a quick comment with regards to the performance measuring. I'm absolutely all for that. I think one of the challenges that hubs have had is that they're not able to properly articulate their impact to people that ask that question. My caveat would be that even as that matrix is being determined, that it has to be absolutely collaborative, going back to one of my points, which is that the roles of hubs can be quite diverse. And so when it comes time to develop this matrix that's intended to measure the impact of hubs, then the recommendation for me would be that is as collaborative as humanly possible. And then finally, I just wanted to say thank you to Jeff and to Dr. Tony. This is a conversation that's well overdue. The fact that we're having a conversation around how hubs can be supported, around the impact and the role of hubs, is quite refreshing to me. Usually these kinds of convenings focus on startups. And so for one to focus on hubs is really great. So kudos to you and kudos to ASEC for bringing us together to have this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nekesa. We also appreciate you showing up and giving very, very important insights. We'll take the next question that is from Frederick. Please proceed.
Thank you, Brian. I think this is a very good opportunity for us to be able to input into our thoughts and already incorporate what we basically are doing. Mine is that I'm happy that Kenya National Innovation Agency has seen it necessary to support us with the establishment of an operational framework for hubs across the country. And if only we would be given an opportunity to have an in-depth, maybe of understanding of the document, and if need be given an opportunity to give feedbacks that also aligns with the recommendations that have already been placed, because I know some of us may not have had a good opportunity to look through into the document and also reflect to be able to give proper feedbacks in terms of contribution. So if that is allowable, then it would be in order. Otherwise, I'm grateful for the work that has already been done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Frederick, from Buy Africa. I think we can now take the last question, and I will pick one from the comments, and that is from Kevin Washira. Kevin is asking, what guidelines are being proposed to ensure linkage between university and private sector hubs?
That's a very critical question. We spent some time on research university hubs. It's also part of part of our secondary, or not secondary, our second agenda item, which is the supporting basic and commercial research at the universities, higher education. And that was a separate program, although there's an overlap with the hubs. So we don't come up, I have to admit, we don't come up with any direct support or recommendations between the universities and private sector for hubs, but there are many recommendations in the other guideline that my colleagues Remika and Professor Tom put together on the support and linkages and partnerships that can be developed between universities and the private sector in general. And that's in a separate guideline that we hopefully we will be sharing with you in due course.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I think mine is to, first of all, thank you, everybody who has come here as we wind up, hoping that we'll continue giving insights and also continue this conversation offline. In the course of time, Kenya will be visiting hubs, working closely with DASEC, so that, as Nekesa has said, make sure that this is more of a collaborative process in terms of giving, or rather creating this document, something standard that will also be usable by everyone. So I'd like to thank the Kenya team for allowing to do this and also taking us through the document to make us understand the document properly. And we'll continue this conversation to ensure that everybody is included. So as we wind up, I'd like to give Jeff or Dr. Kosimbei a chance to give the closing remarks, and we will wind up.
Jeff, you have the honors because you made the presentation. Over to you, Jeff.
Yes, I'll be very brief because I've talked far too much, and I'll pass it over to Professor Dr. Tony, who can summarize things very well. But first of all, I want to thank everybody for their input here. This was actually very, very useful. And it's a shame I didn't see some of you. I met some of you, but not everyone in my visit. But this was we did work very closely with some hubs, and we had worked closely with Mercy on this. But I want to leave one thought to this. We can't emphasize this enough. You're the experts. You know what works well in hubs, and you also know what works and doesn't work with startups. So I don't want us to think that we are proposing regulations. This innovation, one of the obstacles of innovation is too many burdens. And we really want this to be a supportive document, right? This is to help us, just to give us some clarity, some definitions, some useful tools. It is not a set of burdens that we want to impose on anybody. So I'd like to thank everybody for their time and some really thoughtful comments that we will take on board. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tony.
Thanks. I've been keenly listening and following the conversations. As it were, ultimately, the consulting team will wrap this up and hand it over to Kenya. And then Kenya will go into some phase of implementation in a gradual and consultative manner. So we're glad that, even the construction and the proposals that are happening are in a consultative way, so that we build something that will work for us. I mean, it's for Kenyans. It's not one-way communication. It's a cohesive, collaborative way of trying to build something that works for us. And we know our unique contexts and realities. And so we want government then to play a certain role in enhancing this agenda. And it can only do so effectively if we understand one another. So I must say very much thank you for the consulting team. I don't know whether Professor Ogada has left, but it's been a good experience. I've been largely an observer and a facilitator to make sure meetings are happening, the right people are in the room and right conversations are happening, and data is being harvested to shape, the recommendations. What we see happening going forward is that, the consulting team has to end. They can't also do this for far too long. So they would like to present this kind of work as part of the Innovation Week on the 8th of December and say, well, we've gathered this. Here is something we're giving over to Kenya, and then Kenya to process and figure out how to start moving into the next stages. I have discussed with the CS about this work, and he says that, he would like to hold a forum and the PS as well, sometime end of January, February, thereabout, with an intention of also, giving input to the process and then blessing the effort of starting to operationalize some of the elements and kind of build a roadmap. What are the low-hanging fruits that we can start working on while the others we're still sorting them out. And so in the course of 2023, we expect quite some work to happen. This is not the only activity that the consulting team has been working on. They have also been working on national commercialization guidelines that have a potential to support research institutions, TVETs, universities. So as we are speaking right now, we are holding a commercialization leaders summit in Mombasa that will take place Thursday and Friday. And we will be presenting also the proposed guidelines and toolkits to support the national system for commercialization. So these two initiatives will move into some sense of operationalization, in 2023. And I see us working together a lot as we operationalize. And like we said, it's also a continuously improved document. We can't say that, now this is the end of the road. So we'll continue to feed in. After all, the innovation ecosystem is very dynamic in its growth and evolution, and we have to be cognizant of that fact. So thanks very much, ASEC. Thanks very much, the consulting team, and of course, the funding partners. EU was the primary source. And it's been great, and let's continue to pull together. Looking forward to some of you or many of you as part of the Startup Summit during the KIW and the rest of KIW and beyond. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Have a good evening too.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.